The billionaire CEO leaned in, his voice breaking. "Pretend to kiss me, please." And in that instant, the ex-prisoner realized the most powerful man in Seattle was also the most desperate. But why would a man with $12 billion risk everything for a kiss that wasn't real? Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. Your presence means everything, and I'm so grateful to have you with me on this journey. If you're ready to dive into today's story, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far this family reaches. And trust me, tomorrow, I'll be bringing you another story you won't want to miss. Now, let's get straight into it. The 68th floor of Nate Tower scraped the Seattle sky like an accusation, all gleaming steel and floor-to-ceiling windows that made mortals feel insignificant. Douglas Nate stood behind his mahogany desk, his $5,000 suit perfectly tailored, his black hair swept back in that effortless way that cost more than most people's monthly salary. At 32, he commanded an empire worth $12 billion, controlled the fates of thousands of employees, and could buy anything his heart desired. If only his heart desired anything at all. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Nate, your grandmother is on line 1. Douglas's jaw tightened. 99 never called during business hours unless... His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the phone. "Douglas?" Her voice was frailer than last week, each word a visible effort. "I need to see you, tonight. There's something we must discuss before the board meeting tomorrow." "Nina, you should be resting. Bring him." The line went quiet except for the sound of Douglas's world tilting. "Bring who?" "Your partner, Douglas. The one you've been hiding from me for 2 years." Her voice carried that tone he remembered from childhood, gentle but immovable. "I'm 93 years old, and I've never met the person my grandson loves. I want to meet him before I..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Douglas stared out at the city sprawling below him, each light representing lives he'd never touch, hearts he'd never know. "Nai, there's no... Tomorrow the board votes on your leadership. They question whether you're stable, whether you can build a legacy. But I know the truth, Douglas. A man without love is just a boy playing with expensive toys." The phone clicked. Douglas stood frozen, holding the receiver like it might explode. What do you think drives someone to such desperate measures? Have you ever been caught in a lie that spiraled beyond your control? Let us know in the comments below. 67 floors below, Riley Santos pushed a mop across the marble lobby, invisible as furniture to the stream of suits flowing past. At 28, Riley had learned to be a ghost, moving through spaces without being seen, existing without being acknowledged. The building's night janitor uniform hung loose on their lean frame. 3 years of prison food having stripped away any excess. The marble gleamed under Riley's methodical strokes, each swipe erasing the scuff marks left by shoes that cost more than Riley's monthly salary. This was honest work, the first in 3 years, and Riley protected it fiercely. No drama, no complications, no reason for anyone to look too closely at the background check that had somehow overlooked a wrongful conviction for armed robbery. The elevator dinged, and Riley glanced up to see Douglas Nate himself stepping into the lobby. Even at 9 p.m., the CEO moved with that particular arrogance of the untouchable, his phone pressed to his ear. "Cancel the Shanghai meeting. Reschedule the charity gala. I need..." Douglas stopped walking, his eyes scanning the empty lobby as if seeing it for the first time. Riley quickly looked away, concentrating on a particularly stubborn scuff mark. Rich people liked their help invisible, and Riley had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. "Sir?" Douglas's assistant's voice carried through the phone. "You need what?" Douglas's gaze landed on Riley, and something desperate flickered in his dark eyes. "I'll call you back." The phone snapped shut. Douglas's reflection in the polished marble looked like a man drowning in his own success. His perfect facade cracking under pressure, Riley couldn't fathom. "Excuse me," Douglas said, his voice softer than Riley had ever heard it in the elevator announcements that echoed through the building. Riley looked up reluctantly. "Yes, sir?" Up close, Douglas Nate looked different than his magazine covers. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, and his hands shook slightly. Barely noticeable unless you'd learned to read people's tells in places where survival depended on it. "What's your name?" "Riley Santos, sir. Night janitorial staff." Douglas nodded slowly, as if filing away information for some incomprehensible purpose. "How long have you worked here, Riley?" 8 months, sir." Riley's voice carried the careful, neutral tone of someone who'd learned not to give away too much. "And before that?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Riley's past was a minefield of half-truths and careful omissions. I was between opportunities, sir. Something in Douglas's expression shifted, recognition perhaps of someone else who carried secrets. Riley, I need to ask you something, and I know it's going to sound insane. Riley's grip tightened on the mop handle. Here it comes. The moment when the careful house of cards comes tumbling down. Rich men didn't ask janitors for favors unless they wanted something they couldn't buy. Douglas looked around the empty lobby, then stepped closer, lowering his voice. I need someone to pretend to be my partner, just for one evening, just for my grandmother. The words hit Riley like a physical blow. I'm sorry, what? I know how it sounds. I know you don't know me, and I know it's the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard, but Douglas's composure cracked, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. I'm out of options. Riley stared at this man who commanded billions, who could probably buy and sell small countries, begging a minimum wage janitor for the one thing money couldn't purchase, authentic human connection, even if it was fake. Why me? Riley asked quietly. Douglas looked away, his reflection in the marble fractured by the lobby's dramatic lighting. Because you're the only person in this building who looks at me like I'm human instead of a bank account. The honesty in his voice was unexpected, and Riley felt something crack inside their carefully constructed walls. This wasn't the arrogant billionaire from the business magazines. This was just a man who'd built a fortress so high he'd trapped himself inside it. What exactly are you asking me to do? Douglas met Riley's eyes, and in them was the kind of desperation Riley recognized from their own worst moments, the look of someone with everything to lose and nowhere left to run. That's when the words fell from his lips like shattered glass. Pretend to kiss me, please. The silence that followed Douglas's desperate plea stretched between them like a chasm. Riley's knuckles went white around the mop handle, the words hanging in the marble-scented air of the lobby like an impossible equation that couldn't be solved. You want me to what? Riley's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Douglas's face flushed crimson, the carefully maintained composure of a billionaire CEO crumbling in real time. He ran a trembling hand through his perfectly styled hair, destroying hours of meticulous grooming. I know how insane it sounds. I know you think I've lost my mind, but have you lost your mind? Riley interrupted, taking a step back. The mop bucket's wheels squeaked against the marble, the sound echoing through the cavernous lobby like a judgment. Douglas laughed, but it came out broken and hollow. Probably. Yes, definitely. He pressed the heels of his palms against his eyes. My grandmother is dying, Riley. She has maybe weeks left, and she thinks I have this whole life, this partner who makes me happy, and tomorrow the board is voting on whether I'm fit to run this company because apparently being single at 32 makes you unstable in their eyes, and I've been lying to everyone for so long that I... Breathe, Riley said quietly, recognizing the signs of a panic attack from their own experience with them. Just breathe. Douglas stopped mid-sentence, his chest heaving. The lobby's ambient lighting cast strange shadows across his face, making him look younger, more vulnerable. For a moment, he wasn't the untouchable Douglas Nate. He was just a man drowning in his own success. Why don't you have someone? Riley asked, genuine curiosity replacing the initial shock. Someone real, I mean. Riley gestured vaguely at Douglas's expensive suit, his obvious wealth. Rich? Douglas's smile was bitter. You know what's funny about being rich, Riley? People fall in love with your bank account, not you. And after a while, you start to wonder if there's even a you left under all the money. He looked around the empty lobby as if seeing his isolation reflected in its sterile perfection. I haven't had a real conversation with another human being in months. Until tonight. Riley studied Douglas's face, searching for the con, the angle, the manipulation. Prison had taught them to spot lies from a mile away, but all they saw was exhaustion and a loneliness so profound it made their own isolation look like a choice. What exactly would this pretending involve? Riley asked carefully. Hope flickered in Douglas's eyes. Dinner with my grandmother. Maybe hold my hand. Act like we... He swallowed hard. Act like we care about each other, just enough to convince a dying woman that her grandson isn't completely alone in the world. And the kiss? Douglas's cheeks flushed again. She's traditional. She'll expect to see that we're actually together, not just friends. It doesn't have to be, he gestured helplessly. It just has to look real. Riley set down the mop, leaning against it like a crutch. You realize I'm an ex-con, right? That background check your HR department ran? It missed some things, but if your grandmother Googles my name, you think I care about that? Douglas's voice carried a surprising edge of anger. You think I'm going to judge someone for their past when I'm standing here begging a janitor to fake a relationship because I'm too broken to form real ones? The words hung between them, raw and honest. Riley had spent 3 years waiting for someone to see past their record, to judge them on who they were now rather than their worst moment. They'd never expected it to come from someone who lived in a world so far removed from theirs. What would you do if someone offered you a chance to step into a completely different life, even temporarily? Sometimes the most unexpected opportunities come from the most unlikely places. Share your thoughts below. How much? Riley asked quietly. Whatever you want. Name your price. Riley almost laughed. Of course, the billionaire thought everything came down to money. I don't want your money, Douglas. Douglas looked genuinely confused. Then why would you? Because, Riley said slowly, the words forming as they spoke, maybe I'm tired of being invisible too. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to build. Douglas stared at Riley as if seeing them clearly for the first time. Not the janitor, not the background character in his corporate drama, but a person with their own pain, their own loneliness. There would be rules, Riley said, their practical side kicking in. Boundaries. This is pretend, not whatever rich people do for fun. Of course. Absolutely. Douglas nodded eagerly. Just dinner, just enough to make her happy before she... He couldn't finish the sentence. Riley studied his face again. The desperation was real. The pain was real. And underneath all that expensive polish was someone who understood what it felt like to be alone in a room full of people. Okay, Riley said quietly. Douglas blinked. Okay? I'll do it, but I have conditions. Anything. First, no one else can know this is fake. Not your assistant, not your security. No one. If we're going to sell this, it has to be completely believable. Douglas nodded. Agreed. Second, after tomorrow night, we go back to being strangers. You don't owe me anything, and I don't owe you anything. Something flickered across Douglas's face. Disappointment? Relief? It was gone too quickly to read. And third, Riley continued, when your grandmother asks how we met, we tell her a version of the truth, that you saw something in me that other people missed, that you looked past what everyone else saw to who I really was. Douglas's breath caught. Riley. Because that's what you're doing right now, isn't it? Riley's voice was barely above a whisper. Seeing past the uniform, past the criminal record, past all the reasons why this is insane. They stood there in the empty lobby, two people from completely different worlds, connected by their shared understanding of what it meant to be alone. The city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, each one a reminder of all the lives happening outside this strange bubble they'd created. Douglas extended his hand formally, as if they were closing a business deal. Partners? Riley looked at his outstretched hand, manicured, soft, bearing the weight of decisions that affected thousands of people. Then they looked at their own, scarred from prison fights, calloused from honest work, carrying the weight of survival, two different worlds meeting in a handshake. Partners, Riley agreed, their fingers closing around his. The moment their skin touched, something electric passed between them. Douglas's eyes widened slightly, and Riley felt their carefully constructed walls wobble. This was supposed to be pretend, a business transaction dressed up as human connection. So why did the handshake feel more real than anything Riley had experienced in years? Douglas seemed to feel it too, because his grip lingered a moment longer than necessary, his thumb brushing across Riley's knuckles before he pulled away. We should probably... Douglas cleared his throat, the CEO mask sliding back into place. We should go over the details. My car's waiting outside. Riley glanced around the lobby, at the mop bucket, the cleaning supplies, the evidence of their real life waiting to be finished. Leave it, Douglas said, following their gaze. I'll handle it with building management. I can't just leave my job. Riley, Douglas's voice was gentle but firm. For the next 24 hours, your job is helping me save mine. Everything else, I'll take care of. Riley looked at this man who'd just promised to rearrange reality for their convenience, who was asking them to step into a life so foreign it might as well be another planet. Every instinct screamed that this was a mistake, that people like Douglas Nate didn't make deals with people like Riley Santos without some hidden agenda. But when Douglas smiled, really smiled, not the practiced CEO expression but something genuine and grateful, Riley felt something long buried beginning to stir. Maybe, just for one night, being invisible was overrated. All right, Riley said, abandoning the mop bucket in the middle of the pristine lobby. Let's go pretend to be in love. Douglas's smile faltered for just a moment, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Let's pretend." But as they walked toward the elevator together, their reflections multiplied in the lobby's mirrored surfaces. Neither of them looked like they were pretending at all. The ride up to the 68th floor felt like ascending to another planet. Riley watched the numbers climb, 40, 50, 60, each floor representing a distance from their real life that felt increasingly insurmountable. Douglas stood beside them in the mirrored elevator, his reflection multiplied into infinity, each version showing a different shade of nervous energy. "So," Riley said, breaking the silence that had stretched since the lobby, "tell me about your grandmother." Douglas's entire posture shifted, tension melting from his shoulders like ice in sunlight. She's the only person who ever saw me as Douglas, not as the Nate heir. When my parents died in the car accident 15 years ago, she could have sent me to boarding school, let the trustees handle everything. Instead, she moved from Taiwan to raise me herself. The elevator dinged softly as they passed the 50th floor. Riley caught Douglas's reflection watching them with something that looked like hope. "She sounds incredible." "She is. She taught me to play chess on this old wooden board her father made, told me stories about growing up during the war, made dumplings every Sunday even after she could afford to hire a dozen chefs." Douglas's voice grew soft. "She's the reason I know there's more to life than quarterly reports and stock prices, and I've been lying to her for 2 years about having found that more." The elevator doors slid open to reveal Douglas's private office suite, and Riley's breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the space, offering a panoramic view of Seattle that made the city look like a circuit board of lights. The furniture was all clean lines and expensive materials, leather that probably cost more than Riley's annual salary, artwork that belonged in museums. But it was the personal touches that caught Riley's attention. A small wooden chess set on a side table, clearly well used. Photos of Douglas with an elderly woman, both of them laughing, flour dusting their clothes. A child's drawing hung in an expensive frame, stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. "That's from my neighbor's daughter," Douglas said, catching Riley's gaze. "She gave it to me last Christmas, said it was me and the wife she was sure I'd find someday." His smile was rueful. "Even 7-year-olds can see how pathetically alone I am." Riley moved to the windows, pressing their palm against the cool glass. The city sprawled below them, millions of lives playing out in small squares of light. "It's not pathetic to be alone, Douglas. Sometimes it's just safer." "Safer from what?" Riley's reflection stared back at them, ghost-like against the city backdrop. "From hoping for things you can't have, from trusting people who'll let you down, from believing you deserve better than what you've got." Douglas moved to stand beside them, close enough that Riley could smell his cologne, something expensive but not overwhelming. Cedar and bergamot and something uniquely him. "What happened to you?" Douglas asked quietly. "In prison, I mean. You don't have to tell me, but if we're going to convince Nai that I care about you, I should probably know something real about your life." Riley's laugh was bitter. "You sure you want the truth? It's not very romantic." "I want to know you. The real you." The words hit Riley harder than they'd expected. When was the last time someone had wanted to know them, really know them, not just the safe, sanitized version they presented to the world? "I was 25, Riley began, their voice steady despite the tremor in their chest. "Working 2 jobs, day shift at a warehouse, nights at a gas station. My little brother Danny was sick, needed surgery we couldn't afford. I was saving every penny, but it wasn't enough, and the doctors said he was running out of time." Douglas didn't say anything, but Riley could feel him listening with an intensity that made the words easier to speak. "There was this guy, Tommy, who hung around the gas station, small-time dealer, always talking about easy money. He offered me $5,000 to drive a package across town. Said it was just some paperwork. Nothing illegal." Riley's reflection shook its head. "I knew better. I knew exactly what it was, but Danny was dying, and 5,000 might as well have been 5 million to me." "What happened?" "Setup. Tommy was working with the cops trying to reduce his own sentence. They arrested me with a car full of drugs I didn't even know were there, plus the gun Tommy had planted under the seat." Riley's voice grew quieter. "Public defender told me to take the plea deal, 3 years instead of 10. So I did. And your brother?" Riley was quiet for so long that Douglas thought they wouldn't answer. When they finally spoke, their voice was barely audible. "He died 6 months after I went in. State funeral. I wasn't allowed to attend." The silence that followed felt heavy with grief and injustice. Douglas's reflection showed a man struggling with the randomness of fate. How one person could inherit billions while another sacrificed everything for someone they loved and still lost. "I'm sorry," Douglas said, and Riley could tell he meant it. "That's not fair, none of it." "Fair?" Riley turned to face him directly. "Douglas, life isn't fair. Fair would be you having to choose between crime and watching someone you love die. Fair would be me inheriting a company just for being born. We don't get fair. We get what we get. Have you ever felt like the universe dealt you an unfair hand? Sometimes our greatest struggles shape us into who we're meant to become. What do you think? Share your story in the comments." Douglas stared at Riley with something that looked like awe. "How are you not angry? How do you not hate everyone who has what you've been denied?" "Because anger is exhausting," Riley said simply. "And hate would make me like the people who put me in that cage. I'd rather clean floors honestly than steal millions dishonestly." Douglas flinched. "Is that what you think I do? Steal? Don't you?" Riley's gaze was direct, unflinching. "How many people did your company lay off last year to boost quarterly profits? How many small businesses did you crush to expand market share? You might not use a gun, Douglas, but you take things from people just the same." Instead of anger, Douglas looked thoughtful. "You're right. I've never thought about it that way, but you're right." He moved to his desk, pulling out a tablet. "I want to show you something." The screen lit up with financial documents, charts, numbers that made Riley's head spin. Douglas navigated through them with practiced ease. "This is what I've been working on for the past 2 years. The board thinks I'm unfocused, distracted. What they don't know is that I've been quietly restructuring our entire business model." He showed Riley a presentation titled "The Second Chance Initiative." Riley's eyes widened as they read. Job training programs for ex-convicts, partnerships with halfway houses, subsidized housing for people transitioning out of prison, microloans for small businesses in underserved communities. "This is why they question your leadership," Riley said, understanding dawning. "You're trying to turn a profit-driven company into something that actually helps people." Douglas nodded. "The board meeting tomorrow isn't just about whether I'm fit to lead. It's about whether this vision dies with my leadership or becomes the future of Nate Industries." He set the tablet aside. "That's why I need them to see me as stable, settled, someone thinking about legacy instead of just quarterly reports." Riley stared at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. This wasn't just a lonely billionaire looking for companionship. This was someone trying to use their power to fix the broken system that had destroyed lives like Riley's. "Why?" Riley asked quietly. "Because I've had everything handed to me, and it means nothing if I can't use it to help people who've had everything taken away." Douglas met their eyes. "Because maybe if I'd known someone like you 3 years ago, I would have understood sooner that wealth without purpose is just hoarding." The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with something neither had expected. Riley felt their carefully constructed walls continuing to crumble. This man wasn't just asking them to pretend to care about him. He was showing them that he understood, that he'd been listening, that he saw the injustice of their parallel lives and wanted to do something about it. "We should probably figure out our story," Riley said, stepping back from whatever was building between them. "If your grandmother is as sharp as you say, she'll ask questions." Douglas nodded, though something in his expression looked almost disappointed. "Right, our story." They spent the next hour crafting a believable narrative. They'd met when Riley was working late, cleaning the executive floors. Douglas had been there after hours, stressed about a big decision, and they'd struck up a conversation. Riley's honesty and different perspective had intrigued him. He'd asked them out for coffee, and slowly, despite their different worlds, they'd fallen for each other. "It's mostly true," Douglas pointed out as they refined the details, "except for the falling for each other part." Riley glanced up from the notes they'd been taking. "Right, except for that." But as they sat across from each other in Douglas's pristine office, city lights twinkling beyond the windows, both of them felt the lie getting harder to maintain. The chemistry between them was undeniable, the way Douglas listened when Riley spoke. The way Riley's presence seemed to calm something restless in Douglas, the way their eyes kept finding each other despite their efforts to keep this professional. "We should practice," Douglas said suddenly. "Practice what?" "Being together. Holding hands, the kiss." His cheeks flushed. "If we're going to convince her, we need to look comfortable with each other." Riley's heart hammered against their ribs. "That's probably smart." Douglas stood and extended his hand. Riley stared at it for a moment. This was crossing a line from which they might not be able to return, but they reached out anyway, letting their fingers intertwine with his. Douglas's hand was warm, slightly calloused despite his wealth. Apparently, he did more than just sit behind a desk. Riley's hand was rougher, marked by years of physical work, but Douglas didn't seem to notice or care. "This feels," Douglas started. "Natural," Riley finished, surprised by the truth of it. They stood there holding hands in the middle of Douglas's office, both of them realizing that what was supposed to be pretend was feeling remarkably real. Douglas's thumb traced across Riley's knuckles, and Riley felt their breath catch. "The kiss," Douglas said quietly, his eyes searching Riley's face. "We should probably—" Riley nodded, their mouth suddenly dry. "Just to practice, so it looks believable." Douglas moved closer, his free hand coming up to cup Riley's cheek. His touch was gentle, questioning, giving Riley every opportunity to pull away. Riley didn't pull away. Douglas's lips brushed against theirs, soft and tentative. It was supposed to be practice, just a rehearsal for the performance they'd give tomorrow. But the moment their mouths met, something shifted. The kiss deepened, became real, became something neither of them had expected. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Douglas's forehead rested against Riley's, his eyes closed. "That was," Douglas whispered. "Practice," Riley said firmly, stepping back. "That was just practice." But as they gathered their things and prepared to leave, both of them knew they were lying. That kiss had been real, and tomorrow they would have to pretend it wasn't. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. They were being paid to fake a relationship that was becoming more genuine by the hour. As the elevator descended toward Riley's real life, they caught Douglas watching them in the mirrored walls. His expression was soft, wondering, and completely unguarded. Riley realized with a jolt of panic that somewhere between the lobby and the 68th floor, between the desperate plea and the practiced kiss, they had begun to care about Douglas Nate. And that was going to make tomorrow either the best night of their life or the most heartbreaking. 24 hours later, Riley stood in front of a full-length mirror in Douglas's penthouse, barely recognizing their own reflection. The transformation had been surreal. A day of shopping with Douglas's personal stylist, a haircut at a salon that cost more than Riley's monthly rent, clothes that fit like they'd been sewn directly onto their body. The deep navy suit hugged Riley's frame perfectly, the silk shirt underneath soft against skin that had known only rough cotton and polyester blends for years. Even their hands looked different, manicured, the calluses softened but not erased entirely. They still looked like themselves, just elevated, as if someone had taken their rough sketch and turned it into a finished painting. "You look incredible," Douglas said from the doorway, his voice carrying a note of something deeper than appreciation. Riley turned to face him, and their breath caught. Douglas wore a charcoal gray suit that made his dark eyes look almost black. His hair styled but still touchable. He looked like he belonged on magazine covers, but there was something different about him tonight, a nervousness that humanized all that perfection. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Riley said, then immediately felt ridiculous. This was Douglas Nate. He probably had entire closets full of suits that cost more than cars. Douglas smiled, but it was shaky around the edges. "I'm terrified," he admitted quietly. "Of your grandmother. Of her seeing through us. Of disappointing her. Of the board meeting tomorrow." Douglas ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, disrupting it slightly. "Of what happens after tonight when we go back to being strangers." The last admission hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to examine too closely. Riley moved toward him, muscle memory from the night before, guiding them to straighten his tie, smooth his lapels. The gesture was intimate, domestic, and entirely too natural for two people who were supposed to be pretending. "Douglas," Riley said softly, their hands resting on his chest. "We've got this. We know our story, we've practiced, and your grandmother's going to love you no matter what." Douglas's hands came up to cover Riley's, his thumb tracing across their knuckles in that gesture that was becoming familiar. "What if she asks why I kept you a secret? What if she wants to know why someone like you would choose someone like me?" "Then we tell her the truth," Riley said, "that you saw something in me that nobody else did, that you looked past everything that should have made you run in the other direction and chose to stay." Douglas's eyes searched Riley's face. "And what if she asks what you see in me?" Riley's answer came without hesitation, surprising them both with its honesty. That underneath all this, the money, the power, the perfect suits, you're just someone who wants to matter, someone who's tired of being alone, someone who's trying to use what he's been given to make things better for people who weren't as lucky. The words settled between them like a confession. Douglas's grip on Riley's hands tightened, and for a moment, the pretense fell away entirely. They weren't rehearsing for his grandmother. This was real, raw, honest. The intercom buzzed, breaking the spell. "Mr. Nate, your car's ready." Douglas closed his eyes briefly, then stepped back, the CEO mask sliding into place. Showtime. Have you ever been in a situation where pretending became more real than you expected? Sometimes the lines between performance and truth blur in ways that change us forever. What do you think will happen next? Let us know in the comments. The drive to his grandmother's house in Bellevue passed in relative silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Riley watched the city give way to manicured suburbs, houses growing larger and more imposing as they climbed into the hills. When they finally pulled into a circular driveway, Riley's breath caught. The house was beautiful, but not ostentatious, a graceful blend of traditional and modern architecture surrounded by gardens that looked like something from a magazine. Warm light spilled from the windows, and Riley could smell jasmine and roses carried on the evening breeze. "She designed the gardens herself," Douglas said, noticing Riley's appreciation. "Says growing things keeps her connected to life." A woman answered the door before they could knock, small and elegant, with silver hair swept into a neat bun and eyes that held the sharp intelligence of someone who'd seen everything life had to offer. Despite her age, she moved with purpose and grace. "Nai," Douglas said, his voice soft with affection as he leaned down to embrace her. "Douglas," she replied, holding him tightly. Then her gaze shifted to Riley, and they felt immediately examined, evaluated, and somehow accepted. "And you must be Riley," she said in accented English, her voice warm but assessing. "I am Li Wei, but you may call me Nai. Douglas has told me so little about you that I was beginning to think you were imaginary." Riley felt Douglas tense beside them, but they stepped forward with a smile. "It's an honor to meet you, Nai. Douglas speaks of you constantly." "I feel like I already know you." Li Wei's eyes crinkled with amusement. We shall see about that. Come, dinner's ready and I want to hear everything." The dining room was intimate, lit by candles and filled with the aroma of incredible food. Li Wei had clearly spent considerable effort on the meal, traditional Taiwanese dishes alongside Western favorites, each one perfectly prepared. As they settled at the table, Li Wei's questioning began in earnest. But rather than the interrogation Riley had expected, her approach was subtle, conversational. She asked about Riley's work, their interests, their family, weaving the questions into natural conversation while serving them portions of food. Riley found themselves telling the truth more often than not, about growing up in foster care, about their brother Danny, about finding purpose in honest work after losing their way. They edited carefully, omitting the prison sentence, but the core of their story remained intact. "And how did you two meet?" Li Wei asked, her chopsticks pausing halfway to her mouth. Douglas and Riley exchanged a glance, the practiced answer ready on their lips. But something in Li Wei's expression, knowing, patient, like she was waiting for them to choose honesty over performance, made Riley deviate from the script. "I was cleaning his office building," Riley said simply, "late at night when everyone else had gone home. Douglas was working late, stressed about something, and we started talking. I probably should have kept my mouth shut and stayed invisible, but you didn't," Li Wei said, her attention fully focused on Riley now. "No, I told him he looked like he needed a friend more than an employee." Riley glanced at Douglas, who was staring at them with something like amazement. "And instead of having me fired for impertinence, he asked me if I wanted to get coffee." Li Wei smiled, the first genuinely warm expression she'd shown all evening. "And did you? Get coffee?" "We talked until sunrise," Douglas said quietly, taking up the story. "About everything. About what it meant to have purpose, about being alone in a crowd, about what we wanted our lives to look like." He looked at Riley with undisguised affection. "I'd never met anyone who saw the world the way Riley does, who challenged me to think about what I was doing with my life instead of just going through the motions." Li Wei nodded approvingly. "This is good. Douglas has always been too serious, too focused on duty and not enough on joy. You bring light to his eyes, Riley. I can see it." Riley felt their cheeks warm under her approval, and Douglas reached over to take their hand. The gesture was supposed to be for show, but the way his fingers intertwined with theirs felt entirely natural. "Tell me," Li Wei continued, "what do you love about my grandson?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. This was where their careful preparation was supposed to pay off, where they would deliver the practiced lines about Douglas's kindness and intelligence and dedication. Instead, Riley found themselves speaking from the heart. "He sees people," Riley said quietly. "Really sees them. not just what they can do for him or how they fit into his world, but who they are underneath everything else. He looks at a janitor and sees someone worth knowing. He looks at a broken system and sees something worth fixing. Riley's voice grew softer. And when he looks at me, I don't feel invisible anymore. Li Wei's eyes had grown bright with unshed tears. Douglas was staring at Riley like they'd just handed him something precious and fragile. "And you, Douglas?" Li Wei asked. "What do you love about Riley?" Douglas was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing across Riley's knuckles in that gesture that had become so familiar. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Riley makes me want to be better. Not richer or more successful, but better. Someone worthy of the faith they have in me." He looked directly at Riley as he spoke. "They see the person I want to be, not just the person I am. And when I'm with them, I remember what it feels like to hope for something more than just getting through another day." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Li Wei wiped her eyes with her napkin, and Riley felt their own throat tight with unshed tears. Somewhere in the middle of their performance, they'd stopped acting. "I want to see you kiss," Li Wei said suddenly, her voice matter-of-fact despite the tears in her eyes. Riley's heart stopped. This was the moment they'd practiced for, prepared for, but now it felt monumental in a way that had nothing to do with convincing Douglas's grandmother. Douglas turned to face Riley fully, his hand coming up to cup their cheek. His touch was gentle, reverent, like he was handling something precious. Riley could see their own reflection in his dark eyes, could see the exact moment when pretense fell away entirely. When their lips met. It wasn't the practice kiss from the night before. This was desperate, honest, full of all the things they hadn't been able to say out loud. Riley's hands fisted in Douglas's suit jacket, pulling him closer, and Douglas's arm came around their waist like he was afraid they might disappear. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, their foreheads pressed together. The dining room, Li Wei, the entire charade, everything had fallen away except this moment, this connection that neither of them had seen coming. "Oh," Li Wei said softly, and when they looked at her, she was smiling through her tears. "Oh, my dear boys. You're so in love you don't even know it yet." Riley's heart hammered against their ribs. Douglas's hand was still cupping their cheek, his thumb brushing across their skin with infinite tenderness. "Nye, Douglas said, his voice shaky. "Don't," she said, holding up a hand. "Don't you dare apologize for finding love, Douglas. Don't you dare pretend this isn't real because you're afraid of it." She stood from the table, moving to Douglas's side and placing her hands on both of their shoulders. "I have been alive for 93 years. I have seen real love exactly 4 times in my life. Once between my parents, once between your parents, once in my own marriage. And now, here, between you two. Do not waste it because you think love should look different than this." Riley felt tears spill over, and Douglas's grip on their hand tightened like a lifeline. "The board meeting tomorrow," Douglas said quietly. "If they find out Riley's background, if they think I'm making poor judgments, then they are fools who don't deserve to run a company that my husband built," Li Wei said firmly. "But more than that, Douglas, they would be wrong. This person beside you, they are not your weakness, they are your strength." She moved back to her seat, pouring tea for all 3 of them with steady hands. "Now, tell me about these plans of yours, Douglas, the ones you think the board won't understand. Tell me how you and Riley are going to change the world." As Douglas began to explain his second chance initiative, his voice growing stronger and more passionate with each detail, Riley realized something that hit them like a physical blow. They were in love with Douglas Nate. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, but the man who wanted to use his power to help people like them. The man who saw worth in an ex-con janitor who listened when they spoke, who kissed them like they were something precious. And judging by the way Douglas kept looking at them, the way his voice softened when he talked about their input on his plans, the way his hand never left theirs throughout the entire evening, Riley wasn't alone in this feeling. As the night wound down and they prepared to leave, Li Wei hugged them both tightly. "The board meeting is tomorrow," she whispered to Douglas. "But whatever happens, you are not alone anymore, neither of you." Walking back to the car, Riley felt like they were floating. The evening air was cool against their flushed cheeks, and Douglas's hand was warm in theirs. "So," Douglas said as they reached the car, turning to face Riley in the soft glow of the garden lights. "That was real," Riley finished. "That was real, wasn't it?" Douglas nodded, his eyes searching Riley's face. "What happens now?" Riley looked at this man who'd started the evening as their fake boyfriend, and was ending it as something they couldn't yet name, but desperately wanted to explore. Now we find out if what happened in there was strong enough to survive what happens tomorrow, Riley said quietly. Douglas leaned down and kissed them again, soft and sweet and full of promise. I hope it is, he whispered against their lips, because I don't think I can go back to pretending you don't exist. As they drove back toward the city, Riley stared out at the lights and realized their carefully ordered world was about to be completely upended. And for the first time in years, they couldn't wait to see what happened next. The Nate Industries boardroom stretched like a battlefield at dawn, its polished table reflecting the faces of 12 of the most powerful people in Seattle's business community. Douglas sat at the head of the table in his perfectly tailored suit, every inch the confident CEO, but Riley could see the tension in the set of his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed silently against his leg. Riley shouldn't have been there at all. The original plan had been simple. Attend dinner with Nai, sell the relationship, let Douglas face the board meeting alone with his newfound stability as armor. But at 6 a.m., Douglas had called, his voice rough with sleepless anxiety. I need you there, he had said without preamble. I know it wasn't part of the deal, but I can't do this without you, not anymore. So Riley sat in the gallery behind bulletproof glass, watching the man they'd fallen in love with fight for his vision while a room full of sharks circled for blood. Board Chairman William Hartley, a silver-haired man who radiated old money and older prejudices, leaned back in his leather chair with obvious skepticism. Douglas, your second chance initiative is admirable in theory, but the numbers don't lie. You're proposing to spend $47 million on what amounts to charity. It's not charity, William. Douglas's voice was steady, professional, but Riley could hear the passion underneath. It's investment. Ex-convicts have a 68% recidivism rate nationally. Our pilot program reduced that to 12% among participants. These people don't need handouts. They need opportunities. Board member Patricia Kim shuffled through the financial projections. The 5-year outlook shows minimal profit margins. Our shareholders expect leadership that builds sustainable growth, Douglas interrupted smoothly. Short-term thinking is what destroys companies. We're not just changing lives. We're creating a workforce that's loyal, motivated, and invested in our success because we invested in theirs. Riley's heart swelled, watching Douglas defend not just a business plan, but a vision of what corporate responsibility could look like. This was the man who'd seen potential in a janitor, who'd looked past surface appearances to find something worth saving. Hartley's expression remained unconvinced. And what about your personal judgment, Douglas? This sudden relationship you've been hiding. We've done some research into your companion. Riley's blood ran cold. Douglas's jaw tightened, his hands clenching on the table. My personal life is not up for debate in this boardroom. It is when it affects your decision-making, Hartley continued relentlessly. Riley Santos, 3 years in Walla Walla State Penitentiary for armed robbery and drug possession. Currently employed as a janitor in this very building. Tell me, Douglas, how does dating a convicted felon reflect the kind of judgment we want in a CEO? The boardroom fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning and Riley's hammering heart. Through the glass, they watched Douglas's face cycle through emotions: anger, hurt, protective fury. Douglas stood slowly, his chair rolling back with deliberate precision. When he spoke, his voice was diamond-hard and utterly controlled. Riley Santos was wrongfully convicted while trying to save their dying brother's life. They served 3 years for a crime they didn't commit. Then rebuilt their life from nothing through honest work and determination. They've shown more integrity in the worst circumstances than most people show in the best ones. He moved to stand directly in front of Hartley, no longer the composed CEO, but something fiercer, more protective. But more than that, William, Riley Santos is the person who made me realize that a company's worth isn't measured in stock prices. It's measured in how many lives it improves. They're the reason I understand that real leadership means lifting others up, not just climbing higher yourself. Riley pressed their hand against the glass, tears blurring their vision. Douglas was sacrificing everything, his position, his company, his grandmother's legacy, to defend them. So if you want to question my judgment, Douglas continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, question this. I choose to surround myself with people who've overcome impossible odds and still choose compassion. I choose to build a company that creates opportunities instead of just exploiting them. And I choose to love someone who sees the best in me even when I can't see it in myself. The word love hung in the air like a bell that couldn't be unrung. Douglas's eyes found Riley through the glass, and the raw honesty in his expression took their breath away. Board member Janet Rodriguez cleared her throat. "Douglas, your passion is admirable, but nothing." The voice came from the back of the room, and every head turned. Li Wei walked in with the calm authority of someone who'd built an empire from nothing, her silver hair swept back, her dark eyes blazing with determination. "Nai," Douglas breathed. "You shouldn't be here. The stress of watching my grandson tear himself apart is worse than anything this room can dish out," she said firmly, taking a seat at the table like she belonged there. Which, Riley realized, she did. Li Wei still held a significant minority stake in Nate Industries. She fixed Hartley with a stare that could have cut glass. "William, you speak of judgment and leadership as if they were abstract concepts. Let me tell you about real leadership." Li Wei's voice carried the weight of decades, of building something meaningful from nothing. "Real leadership is my grandson working 18-hour days not to increase his own wealth, but to create opportunities for people society has discarded. Real leadership is recognizing that the person cleaning your floors might have insights you've never considered. Real leadership is having the courage to love openly and authentically instead of hiding behind corporate respectability." She stood, her small frame somehow commanding the entire room. "Douglas is proposing to transform this company from a profit machine into something that actually matters. And you want to punish him for falling in love with someone who embodies the very values he's trying to instill? Sometimes it takes losing everything to realize what truly matters. Have you ever had to choose between playing it safe and fighting for what you believe in? What would you choose? Share your thoughts below." Hartley's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Lee, with all due respect, sentiment doesn't run companies. Neither does fear," Li Wei shot back. "And that's all I see from this board. Fear of change, fear of taking risks, fear of being more than just another soulless corporation." She gestured toward the financial projections Douglas had prepared. "These numbers aren't just about profit margins. They're about building something sustainable, something that will still matter in 50 years. Board member David Boris spoke up quietly. "The Second Chance Initiative does show promising metrics in the pilot programs, and the PR value alone could be significant." "This isn't about PR," Douglas said firmly. "This is about doing what's right." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I've been reviewing the employee satisfaction surveys from departments where ex-cons have been hired through your pilot program. Productivity is up 23%. Turnover is down 41%. These people are grateful for the opportunity, and it shows in their work." Riley watched hope flicker in Douglas's eyes as more board members began engaging with the actual data rather than just their prejudices. Kim leaned forward, studying the projections more carefully. "If we implement this gradually, starting with the most promising metrics from the pilot program, we could scale up based on results," finished Rodriguez, "minimize risk while maximizing impact." The tide was turning. Riley could see it in the shifting body language around the table, in the way skeptical frowns were becoming thoughtful consideration. But Hartley wasn't finished. "And what about the optics? The CEO of Nate Industries dating an ex-convict will be tabloid fodder for months." Li Wei's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "William, you've been married 4 times, twice to women young enough to be your granddaughter. Patricia, your son just finished rehab for the 3rd time. David, your brother embezzled $2 million from his own charity and you helped cover it up." Her smile was razor thin. "Should we discuss optics?" The silence that followed was deafening. Hartley's face had gone from red to gray, and several other board members looked distinctly uncomfortable. "The difference," Li Wei continued, "is that Douglas and Riley's relationship is based on mutual respect and genuine caring. Douglas has found someone who challenges him to be better, and that makes him a better leader. I've seen them together. This isn't scandal, it's inspiration." Douglas stood again, but this time his posture was confident, settled. "I'm not asking you to approve of my personal life. I'm asking you to approve a business plan that will transform this company into something we can all be proud of." He gestured toward the projections. "The numbers work. The pilot programs prove the concept. The only question is whether we have the courage to be leaders instead of followers." The room fell silent except for the rustle of papers as board members reviewed the data with fresh eyes. Riley held their breath, watching the man they loved stake everything on a vision of what the corporate world could become. Finally, Rodriguez spoke. I move to approve the Second Chance Initiative as outlined, with a graduated implementation schedule and quarterly reviews. Seconded, said Kim. All in favor? Li Wei asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd helped build the company from nothing. 7 hands rose around the table. Only Hartley and 2 others abstained. Douglas sagged slightly with relief, but his grandmother wasn't finished. I also moved to censure William Hartley for his inappropriate personal attacks and recommend his replacement as board chairman, Li Wei said calmly. This time, 8 hands rose. Hartley stood abruptly, his face purple with rage. This is a mistake. You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. No, William, Li Wei said quietly. We're finally remembering that business is about people, not just profit, something you seem to have forgotten. As Hartley stormed out, the remaining board members began discussing implementation details with genuine enthusiasm. Douglas caught Riley's eye through the glass, his smile brighter than the Seattle sun breaking through morning clouds. An hour later, Riley waited in Douglas's office while he finished the post-meeting discussions. The city sprawled below them, but for the first time since entering this corporate world, Riley felt like they belonged in it. Douglas burst through the door, his professional composure completely abandoned. We did it, he said, crossing to Riley in 3 quick strides. We actually did it. You did it, Riley corrected, but Douglas shook his head. No, we. None of this would have happened without you. The program, the courage to fight for it, the perspective that made it possible, all of it started with you. He cupped Riley's face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across their cheekbones. I meant what I said in there, about loving you, about choosing you. Riley's heart hammered against their ribs. Douglas, you don't have to. I'm not saying it because I have to, Douglas interrupted. I'm saying it because it's true. Somewhere between your desperate plea in the lobby and defending you to the board, this stopped being pretend. I love you, Riley Santos. I love your strength, your integrity, your ability to see possibility where everyone else sees problems. I love that you make me want to be worthy of the power I've been given. Riley felt tears spill over, 3 years of walls finally crumbling completely. I love you too. I didn't mean to. I tried not to, but Douglas, they laughed through their tears. You looked at a convicted felon mopping your floors and saw someone worth knowing. How could I not fall in love with that? Douglas kissed them then, deep and desperate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. So what happens now? Riley asked quietly. Douglas smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. Now we build something beautiful. The program, the company, us, all of it. He pulled back to look at Riley directly. Will you work with me? Not as my fake boyfriend, not as a janitor, but as my partner in this? The program needs someone who understands what these people have been through, who can help design systems that actually work. Riley stared at him, hardly daring to believe what they were hearing. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a purpose, a chance to turn your experience into something that helps others like you. Douglas's expression grew serious. It won't be easy. There will be people who question your background, who think you don't belong in corporate boardrooms. But if you're willing to fight for it. With you? Riley asked. With me? Riley thought about the path that had led them here, the wrongful conviction, the lost years, the shame and struggle and slow rebuilding of a life worth living. All of it had brought them to this moment, to this man who saw their scars as proof of their strength rather than evidence of their weakness. Yes, Riley said simply. Yes to all of it. Douglas's smile could have powered the entire building. He spun Riley around in a circle, both of them laughing like children, like people who'd been holding their breath for years and could finally exhale. 6 months later, Riley stood in the same boardroom where they had watched Douglas fight for his vision, but this time they wore their own perfectly tailored suit and carried their own presentation. The Second Chance Initiative had exceeded every projection, and Riley had just been promoted to Director of Community Outreach. Douglas sat at the head of the table, his eyes bright with pride as Riley outlined their expansion plans. Under the table, his foot brushed against Riley's, a small, private gesture of support and affection. After the meeting, they walked hand in hand through the lobby where it all began. The marble still gleamed, the suits still rushed past with their important business, but everything felt different now. Riley wasn't invisible anymore. They belonged here, had earned their place through hard work and vision and the support of someone who believed in them. Remember when you begged me to pretend to kiss you? Riley said, grinning at Douglas. Douglas laughed, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. Best decision I ever made, even if it was completely insane. What's insane is that it worked. Douglas stopped walking, tugging Riley around to face him. You know what's not insane? This. He kissed Riley right there in the lobby, in front of God and everyone, claiming them publicly and without apology. When they broke apart, Riley noticed several employees had paused to smile at them, not with judgment or surprise, but with the kind of warmth reserved for witnessing something genuine and beautiful. I love you, Riley Santos, Douglas said quietly, not caring who might hear. I love you too, Douglas Nate, Riley replied, equally unashamed. As they headed toward the elevator that would take them up to their shared future, Riley caught their reflection in the marble floor. Two people from different worlds, holding hands and building something beautiful together. The ex-prisoner and the billionaire, CEO. Writing a love story that proved sometimes the most unlikely partnerships create the most extraordinary transformations. What did you think of Douglas and Riley's journey from desperation to love to purpose? Have you ever found that your greatest struggles led you to your greatest joys? Sometimes the most broken people can build the most beautiful things together. Share your thoughts about second chances and unexpected love in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.